Many of you have probably heard of the Rockefeller family. If not, you are at least aware that there are several families believed to be ruling the world. The Rockefeller family is one of them. John D. Rockefeller was the man who controlled America and its oil, placing him at the top of the pyramid and making him America's first billionaire. Despite being from a rather poor and morally questionable family background, he rose to prominence. Let me tell you the interesting and tumultuous life of John D. Rockefeller. He was the second of 6 children born to a fraudulent father and a devout mother. Despite not being wealthy, they weren't exactly poor either. His father often left them alone for weeks at a time, posing as a doctor named William Livingston in the city, selling medicines despite not being a real doctor. Not only was his father dishonest in business, but he was also leading a double life, being married to another woman in the city, while still being married to John's mother. Despite this deceit, his father boasted about fooling people and even lent small amounts of money to his children. Although his family life was turbulent, John himself was known for being calm, introverted, serious, devout, and diligent. He spent his youth trying to straighten out his family's life and placing importance on his education. In the following years, he would encounter unexpected opportunities. After dropping out of college at the age of 16, John started working as a clerk at Heavy and Tuttle, an accounting firm, on September 26th. He considered this day his personal holiday, celebrating it every year. Despite long hours, he enjoyed the office's methods and systems. He excelled at calculating transportation costs, a skill that would serve him well when he eventually started his own business. John's role at Heavy and Tuttle was to record financial transactions and negotiate with ship owners and captains. Through these negotiations, he learned not only how to calculate transportation costs, but also how to reduce them later. Under Hallett's instructions, Rockefeller was given the task of collecting debts one day. John's boss put a $4,000 check in the safe, and John knew the combination. Did he steal it? No. He simply wanted to take hold of the $4,000 check. He dreamed of earning as much money as his bosses did one day and reminded himself of becoming rich. Before going to work each day, in his youth, John had 2 major goals: to earn $100, and to live for 100 years. For someone earning only $50 a month, it wasn't a bad goal at all. $100 at that time is roughly equivalent to $3.14 million today. With his job and a certain income, his family's life stabilized. He was working for only $50 a month, and whatever money he received, he invested 10% of it. After 2 years in the job, one of the company's founders resigned, leaving all the accounting work to John. The company's income plummeted drastically, and it could have even gone out of business. However, John remained calm and unconcerned, as he was known among his friends. His 2 years of accounting experience boosted his confidence, and he was ready to start his own company. While working as a clerk, John had a chemist friend named Morris Clark, who lived on a street below his. At just 18 years old, John had already earned a good reputation as an accountant. Morris expressed his plan to start a manufacturing business and offered John a partnership After saving some money, they established Clark and Yaller, a company that sold goods like fish and beans. Initially, it was tough, as they had to tirelessly roam the streets in search of customers. However, being their own bosses kept them motivated, despite being described by friends as calm and introverted. John excelled at sales due to his mature demeanor, quickly gaining the trust of older men in the industry and rapidly filling their customer list. However, they lacked sufficient capital to reach more customers and cover the cost of their products. They decided to take out a loan from the bank, requesting $5,000 to invest and eventually receiving $10,000. This extra credit, coupled with the outbreak of the American Civil War, facilitated rapid business growth. Being devout, John opposed slavery and hoped for the victory of those fighting against it. However, he couldn't join the war as he had a family to support. Instead, he paid $300 for someone to take his place, and additionally, he paid extra for a few soldiers. With the onset of the war, the value of food soared, allowing John and Morris to make a profit of $500,000 in today's money, equivalent to $177. Zero at the time. Later on, John found another opportunity to increase his wealth. Before gas lamps, there were oil lamps, fueled by whale oil, which was expensive and environmentally damaging due to overhunting of whales. During this time, someone in Pennsylvania discovered that they could extract oil by drilling into the ground. This led to a surge of people entering the oil business, using wooden structures for extraction, which was relatively easy and profitable. This endeavor significantly contributed to their growing fortunes. In fact, John made his fortune through oil, just like many others during that time. It was during these events that John met Samuel Andrews, who was looking for investors to open an oil refinery near Pennsylvania. Andrews had a significant advantage over other competitors. He knew the secret of adding sulfuric acid to oil to refine it, a technique that greatly improved the quality of the product. After accumulating a substantial amount of money from their food business, John and Morris considered diversifying their investments and saw the potential in Andrews' venture. Initially skeptical, they lent him for $1,000. Despite initial doubts, the refined gas sold like crazy because it was better than the raw oil. And John and Morris took a risky move by leaving their food business and focusing solely on the oil industry. However, oil was unpredictable, its exact location was unknown, and it was finite. Thus, its price fluctuated wildly. When oil was discovered somewhere, they extracted every last drop from it. During this time, oil prices dropped as low as 10 cents and then skyrocketed back up to $14. Predicting oil supply was difficult, so John decided to focus only on refining instead of mining. Yet, refining wasn't profitable when oil prices dropped, and they feared that when one well dried up, they'd have nothing left to sell. This uncertainty was too much for Morris, who sold his share to John for $72,500, equivalent to $1.35 million today. While Morris opted for the safety of cashing out, John ventured into the risky oil business. Just as these events unfolded, a massive oil field was discovered in Pennsylvania, dispelling John's last lingering doubts. However, the market was still highly competitive. and John had to rise to the challenge. After Clark's departure, John established a new company called Standard Oil. He expanded the company to become the most profitable refinery in Ohio. While he knew he could become rich from oil, he also realized he couldn't do it alone. Therefore, he sought a new partner, Henry Flagler, who shared his ambition not just to make money, but to build an empire. However, when faced with competition, John became even more ruthless, not hesitating to destroy his enemies when the opportunity arose. Later, John himself adopted this philosophy. Now, others could refine oil as well. Standard Oil was not the only player in the industry. To undercut his competitors, John utilized the transportation cost-cutting tactics he had learned as an accountant. At that time, transportation by railways was crucial for oil, and John secretly made a deal with them. Back then, oil was primarily transported by major railways like New York Central, Erie, and Pennsylvania Railroad. New York Central and Erie had made significant investments in Cleveland, but when Pennsylvania Railroad started transporting oil directly from Cleveland to New York instead of first to Philadelphia, many refineries abandoned the city. Sensing an opportunity, John cleverly negotiated a massive discount of around 75% in oil transportation rates from Erie. While Erie reluctantly accepted this, New York Central offered a slightly different deal, but still transported oil to refineries at a very low rate, with official rates at $2.40 per barrel. New York Central transported oil for just $1.65 per barrel, providing guaranteed shipments. This irresistible offer was a game changer for the railways involved, as John transported oil much cheaper than his competitors. He had a significant advantage. However, this discounted transportation was kept a secret. Standard Oil's competitors paid much more to transport their oil, and they didn't want this known. With his ability to transport at a lower cost, John had the power to dictate the price of oil. He continuously drove down the price, forcing his competitors to follow suit to remain competitive. Knowing that he was getting oil at a much higher cost, John lowered the price to the extent that some competitors went bankrupt. Railway companies provided significant advantages to large businesses compared to small ones. However, there was no law to prevent such monopolistic practices, and it would be more than 10 years before such legislation would be enacted. Therefore, legally, John was doing nothing wrong, but ethically, it was certainly questionable and would cause him trouble in the future. John's monopoly ambitions didn't end there. Tom Scott, the owner of Pennsylvania Railroad, was preparing to make a deal with Standard Oil. He proposed a secret alliance between Standard Oil, Pennsylvania Railroad, New York Central, and Erie, forming a powerful group that included the elite, including Rockefeller. Thus, Standard Oil, along with Pennsylvania Railroad, New York Central, and Erie formed an alliance together. John was one of the largest consumers of oil in the country. Thus, the deal was that, in exchange for a secret discount of X% on transportation costs, all of John's oil would be transported solely through these railways. However, John didn't settle for benefiting only himself. He engineered the deal to be devastating for his competitors as well. For instance, any railway outside this secret alliance that transported oil for Standard Oil received a discount of X% on their shipping costs. Standard Oil's competitors, on the other hand, not only had to pay higher prices to transport their oil on the same railways, but also indirectly contributed some of this money directly to Rockefeller. Additionally, this arrangement allowed John to gather crucial information about his competitors. However, people weren't oblivious the fees of the country's largest railway doubled, and everyone knew it was because of Tom Scott and John. People protested, even resorting to stealing Standard's shipments and dumping oil. But the most significant blow came from the oil miners. When the miners boycotted them, the alliance had to end just 2 months after its formation. Realizing he couldn't control the oil industry through secret agreements, John decided to do it in plain sight. He began buying out 2 of his 26 rivals in Cleveland at low prices or threatening to bankrupt them, forcing them under his umbrella. This allowed him to start employing the smartest minds in the industry under his wing. By 1873, with a growing number of highly efficient refineries, he held the reins of a powerful empire. He was the monopoly owner of Cleveland's refineries, but there came a crucial period known as Black Thursday in 1873. A series of bank failures plunged the U.S. economy into a 6-year national depression. Petroleum prices dropped not because of an oversupply, but due to a complete decrease in demand. A year after Black Thursday, the price of a barrel of oil dropped to as low as 48 cents. Simply put, a barrel of oil was cheaper than a jug of water. While all refinery companies feared bankruptcy, Standard Oil remained the only profitable refinery even in this situation. They initiated a campaign to purchase refinery centers in other cities like New York. John had the money, and they didn't. Instead of going bankrupt, they were selling their refineries. John, those who didn't want to sell, he indirectly forced them into it by buying up all refinery machinery and oil, effectively blocking their paths to production. In such a way, he acquired a plethora of refineries by forcibly buying them out. Later on, he further reduced costs by establishing a pipeline to transport the oil to refineries and pump the gas oil into major cities. However, after John's move, the railway companies that had become rich from the petroleum industry lost their most important customers. Tom Scott, the owner of the Pennsylvania Railroad, laid his own pipeline and even established his own petroleum refinery. But John didn't even flinch. He drove Tom to the brink of bankruptcy. He could have pushed him into bankruptcy if he wanted, but instead he made a deal to exploit him further. 47% of the oil was transported through the Pennsylvania Railroad. He divided the rest among the other railways in exchange for not going bankrupt. The Pennsylvania Railroad not only transported oil at a very low cost, but also provided John with more detailed information about his competitors. Additionally, regardless of which railway they used, John demanded 20 cents per barrel. On the surface, it resembled previous agreements. But this time, John, who had complete control, was manipulating all the supposedly invincible railways like puppets. Standard Oil now controlled 90% of the entire petroleum industry. The owner of the Pennsylvania Railroad, Scott, could never recover to his former state. He couldn't handle the new interest and died of a stroke a year later. At this point in the story, something very interesting happened. Tom Scott was as influential in the steel industry as John was in the petroleum industry. Andrew Carnegie was his mentor, and Carnegie held John responsible for the death of his mentor. Thus, a rivalry began between Carnegie and Rockefeller. John wanted his wealth to be passed down through generations and had to invest for this purpose. You might think that such a wealthy person would make excellent investments, but that wasn't the case for John. Apart from major investments like purchasing railways, he also bought a long strip of land in Minnesota known as the Mesabi Range. And guess what they found there? Yes, iron. And not just any iron, the highest quality iron discovered so far. This iron vein was incredibly vast, stretching about 305 kilometers. Remember, iron is an essential material for producing steel. Hence, Carnegie feared John's competition in the steel industry. John, however, had planned this in advance. So far, their competition had been only about who was richer, but John wasn't satisfied with just oil. He wanted to dominate steel as well. While John had abundant high-quality iron, Carnegie possessed technological processing machines. However, since Carnegie didn't think iron mining was difficult to find, he hadn't invested in any iron mines. To save his business, Carnegie went to make a deal with John. Carnegie offered John the same railroad discount he had offered him for petroleum. John promised not to establish a steel factory, and Carnegie not to buy land near his iron mine. They agreed. When people saw these two doing business together, they began investing in their companies, planning to invest in both and get rich. J.P. Morgan, on the other hand, believed that John could make much more money with his mine and Carnegie's business. Morgan established a company called U.S. Steel and asked John how much he wanted for the mine. John said he needed to talk to his son. Morgan was deceived by his young age and asked him plainly, "What's your price?" John's son, John Jr., replied, "I didn't come here to sell you something, but you came to buy. What's the price in your mind?" Morgan was quite surprised, went back to his office, thought about it, and made his offer. He acquired the mine for $88.5 million worth of shares. When he also bought Carnegie's steel company, it became the first billion-dollar company. However, keep in mind that John owned a large portion of this company. Moreover, with the advent of automobiles, Standard Oil became even stronger. It had become the best in different sectors and was ready to retire, but he wasn't viewed favorably by the public due to his past misdeeds. In fact, during presidential elections, Theodore Roosevelt promised to rid the country of Standard Oil. Additionally, when a journalist, the daughter of one of the refinery owners John had threatened and who had committed suicide because of him, used the public's hatred against him, Roosevelt launched a lawsuit that would last for years. All of John's secret deals and dirty deeds were exposed, revealing the kind of person he truly was. After 41 years, Standard Oil was finally being dismantled. Despite its dissolution, John became even wealthier than before. Even though Standard Oil was broken up, he still owned shares in each of the 34 companies it was divided into. While all of these companies were making money, John also profited from them, nearly tripling their value. John was now even closer to becoming the world's first billionaire. He decided to use this money for philanthropy, since he first made money. He had been dedicating 10% of his earnings to charitable causes. Even when people hated him, he continued to quietly contribute to charity in his retirement. John established the Rockefeller Foundation and donated more than $540 million, which translates to much more than $10 billion in today's value due to inflation. The Rockefeller Foundation prioritized education and medicine, providing assistance to medical research facilities and universities. They even founded the Rockefeller University. After all of this, John became one of the most generous individuals in history, as the biographer noted. What made him so troubled was that his bad side was as bad as his good side was good, almost like there were two completely different Johns. Despite the controversy surrounding him, one cannot deny that he was one of the most fascinating businessmen in history.